Hi, my name is Mackenzie Growth, and this is my comprehension and vocabulary flip chart for reading in the content area. And this was created using the McDougall-Little Math Course 3 textbook, which focuses on algebra, grade 7. And for this lesson, I chose Chapter 3, Solving Equations Using Subtraction and Addition. So first, looking at my lesson plan, it outlines all the major points of this section of the book. And the purpose of this lesson is for the students to better understand how to solve for a given variable using different operations like addition and subtraction. So in this lesson, there will be balances being used to develop an understanding of equivalency, as well as the students using inverse operations to practice their math skills. And then more in this lesson, there will be vocabulary to deepen their knowledge of solving equations for a given variable. Plus, there's a lot of guided help in this lesson using the I do, we do, you do strategy and helping our students understand the lesson from that very explicit instruction in this lesson plan, giving them examples and allowing them to interact with each other and just build collaboration within the classroom. So the objectives for this lesson plan, the I can statements, is students will identify definitions of key vocabulary terms by using the Freyer diagram, and the assessment evidence for this is with the Freyer diagram of their vocabulary, filling in the definition, characteristics, examples, and non-examples of each vocabulary term as they go. The next objective is students will evaluate the contents of an operation in order to determine and apply addition or subtraction to solve for an unknown variable. And the assessment evidence on this is using addition and subtraction properties of equality in the class and with our examples using the I do, we do, you do technique to help them with every example as they go. The last objective is students will interpret and comprehend word problems given in order to form different equivalent equations and solve for them. So the evidence of this is that the students will be able to share their work and answering the problems during the classroom with their classmates and with each other and with myself as well. So the focus of this lesson is solving equations using addition and subtraction. And that is through our properties, and the students can see them in action with the examples of I do, we do, you do. The prior knowledge known is how to add and subtract, and this will help them solve for both sides of the equivalent equation of the equal sign, as well as knowing the perimeter and areas formula. So that will help them with the real-world problems that we use as examples relating math to much more than just numbers. Then the hook and hold that we have is using balances and weighted objects. So prior to the class starting, balances will be placed in the room with set mass cubes on them, so each side will be equal to one another. The students will experiment with each side of the balance in order to switch the predetermined sides, but still have the balance equal. So they'll be given small cubes, cubed logs, and large blocks, and this interactive activity will allow for the students to hypothesize and experiment to find out what each amount equals of another. So how many cubes equal a log, how many logs equals a large block, and vice versa, using both subtraction and addition through collaboration prior of them learning of the addition and subtraction properties. So they'll find these out through experimentation and being interactive with one another within the class. The graphic organizer that I chose to use and create has balances, which represents the students' thoughts and how their thoughts will balance throughout this lesson. I did this to show the students at the main point of this lesson, but to also visually explain to them that the number definition and the algebraic meaning are equal to one another. So when they're writing down definitions in their graphic organizer or on quizzes or on tests, both answers are the same and that each can be given or just one, but it will equal one another. And then on this graphic organizer, there's also spots for definitions of the two main points, the subtraction property of equality and the addition property of equality, making sure that they have the definition in there as well. And then it also gives the students a place to put examples that they came up with throughout the class period down below of both the subtraction property and the addition property, giving examples of each and allowing it to relate to their own style of learning, not just a set example. The graphic organizer helps them be more creative with their learning, making more connections. Some of the key vocabulary terms in this are equivalent equations, which that is equations that have the same solution after performing the operations that solve for these variables. Inverse operations, and that's an operation that undoes another operation. The subtraction property of equality, which is subtracting the same amount from each side of an equation to produce an equivalent equation. The addition property of equality, which is adding instead of subtracting the same amount or number from each side of the equation to produce an equivalent equation. And variable, which is a common generic symbol that is used to represent an unknown amount. And this can be seen as letters of the alphabet in math classes. And then the vocabulary activity is the Freyer diagram, and I will have the students complete this with their vocabulary terms for each term. And I chose this activity because it hits multiple intelligences, with the visual intelligence being able to draw their definitions or draw examples using colors with this will help the visual learners to learn. And then the logical, seeing the math behind each of these vocabulary terms helps our logical thinkers, as well as our linguistic, which is using our word definitions to help these learners. So the Freyer diagram in math is very crucial, helping to hit all intelligences of your classroom. Looking at the comprehension strategy and activity, I chose summarizing as my main strategy, and it is so important in math class because it keeps the information fresh in the students' heads. And with this cubing activity, it has a bunch of wide variety of questions that the students are able to solve for after learning this lesson. And during this, using the cube, I would put the class into small groups to hear others' opinions. And this cubing activity is great for also reviewing and summarizing, but reviewing your knowledge because you can pull it out at any time. It's pretty easy for the students just to roll and answer the questions, so it's a great summary at the end of class, what we learned, and getting all the answers in one space. And summarization is important in the math classroom because it keeps building on your knowledge and your comprehension of past knowledge. So you want to keep going over that in the math classroom. Then, looking at the writing assignment, I chose the weekly learning log, and this is an excellent tool to use in the math classroom because it allows for students to share their opinions or questions openly with the teacher, but not in front of the class, which may turn students away from participating or turn them away from asking questions or letting you know as a teacher that they're confused, because other students may have the same confusion. So they can put their opinions and their questions in the learning log for that week, and you'll be able to answer those later on within the next couple of days to help each student learn better. And the students can use this journal for refreshers on the topics that they've learned throughout the week, as well as related to outside courses or activities, making the writing assignment a cross-curricular thing, writing it and hitting multiple parts of information, making that new topic easily to learn in their brain, keeping it fresh, and then it makes the connections easier to understand the logic behind mathematics in the classroom. And so this just states that writing assignments are so important in math because they allow for all your students to help make connections and learn from what's going on. And then here are my references that I used throughout the presentation here, and now on to my vocabulary lesson and activity. I'm going to have my mom help me be my student, and we're just going to go through our vocabulary activity with them using the Freyer diagram. So here we go. So today we've been learning about how to solve equations using addition and subtraction. So first we're going to review some vocabulary that we've learned. Our first vocabulary is equivalent equations, and these are equations that have the same solution after performing the operation that solves for a variable. So using those wordings, what box do you think we would put that in our Freyer diagram?
Definition.
Yes. Do you know any characteristics of these equations?
Equal signs.
Yes, that's correct. Each of them has an equal sign, so they're all similar to one another. So an example of this would be x plus 5 equals 10, because you would perform the same operation subtracting 5 from each side to get the x by itself. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Our next vocabulary word is inverse operations, and that is an operation that undoes another operation. Can you think of something in real life that would undo anything?
The eraser on a pencil.
Correct, yep. So the eraser will undo it. And in math, we can see this with our addition and subtraction. Addition will undo the subtracting and vice versa, as well as multiplication to division. So now we have the subtraction property of equality, and that's when you subtract the same number from each side of the equation to produce an equivalent equation. An example of this would be x plus 5 equals 7. Why do you think that's an example of this?
Because you subtract 5 from each side of the equal sign and get x equals 2.
That's correct, yeah. And then once you get x equals 2, you can plug 2 in for x to double check your work, because in math it's very important to double check. So you get 2 plus 5 equals 7. Going off of our subtraction, we have the addition property of equality, and that's very similar to our subtraction, but instead of subtracting the same amount from each side of our equation, we would add the same amount from each side of our equation. So what do you think would be an example of this?
X minus 5 equals 7.
That is correct. And why is that an example of it?
Because you add 5 to each side and x equals 12.
Correct. Nicely done. And then a non-example of this would be x plus 5 equals 7, because you would subtract. And always double checking your work in math, you would plug 12 in for x, so you get 12 minus 5 equaling 7, and that's correct, so you know you did your work right. The last vocabulary term that we're going to go over is going off of all of our examples. Have you noticed that there's anything related to one another?
Nope.
So these are the letters that you're seeing, so the x and the y's, and these are called our variables. And that is just a symbol that is used to represent an unknown amount. And so we solve for it. So we wouldn't have a number being our variable because the number equals itself, so 3 equals 3 every time. But we have letters and other symbols representing our variable because it's an unknown amount. We don't know what number it will represent. Thank you for helping me, Mom.
You're welcome.
And that is my comprehension and vocabulary activity for this assignment. Thank you very much.